Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today, this afternoon, to hear about the Biennial Energy Report. We're going to give folks a few more minutes to join, and we'll get started in just a couple minutes. Thanks for being here. Good afternoon. Hi, and thanks for being here. We are still having some people join, but I will go ahead and get us started on our webinar this afternoon. It's really a pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar on the Oregon Department of Energy's Biennial Energy Report. We really appreciate you joining us. My name is Janine Benner, and I'm the Director of the Oregon Department of Energy. And I'll be kicking us off today, but I'll be joined by a few colleagues who will be presenting on the report. And we really hope that you'll walk away today with a better understanding of Oregon's energy landscape and how to use this biennial energy report as a resource. All right, if we could go to the next slide, please, Andy. And the next slide is going to show you how to use WebEx, which is the virtual meeting platform that we're using today. So please note that we will be using the chat function for questions. You can find the chat on the bottom right of your screen. At the end of the webinar, we'll try to leave some additional time for questions. And if we get to do this, you can raise your hand to ask a question if you'd like out loud. The host will call on you and then take you off mute to ask your question. And you can raise your hand by clicking the reactions button on the bottom of the screen. And don't forget to lower it when you're done. So here's the agenda for today. Again, the purpose of our webinar is to introduce you to the report's content through a brief orientation to each section. We'll start with a bit of background on the report and the process that we use to scope and draft it. Then we'll provide an overview for each section: energy by the numbers, history timeline, Energy 101, resource and technology reviews, and updates to state energy projects. Also, you might hear us refer to the report as the BER. And the BER stands for the Biennial Energy Report. It's become fodder for a lot of puns for us over the years. So we really hope that you'll engage with us through the chat function. As I mentioned earlier, you can find that on the bottom right of your screen. Please feel free to submit questions to the ODO team through the chat box. My colleagues will be monitoring these and will either assign your questions to one of our staff to answer, ask it to the speaker, or suggest that it be addressed at the end of the webinar. We'll be recording this webinar and the questions, so if we don't get to yours during the webinar, we'll do our best to follow up with an answer. Now, if you have a technical issue, you can also say that and submit that through the chat box. My colleague Stacy is the host of our webinar, and we'll be monitoring the chat, and we'll try to address any technical issues that come up as well. And we will also have a few polls that we'll ask you today. There will be a few times during the webinar where a question will pop up, again on the right-hand side of your screen, and we hope that you'll answer it. And again, we appreciate the opportunity to be able to engage with you on the report today. So with that, I would like us to test out the polling technology with a couple of questions. So you should see the first question pop up momentarily. There we go, Slido. That's where the question will be. So our first question, I think it's still loading, but it will be, have you attended a past Biennial Energy Report webinar before, such as in 2020 or 2022? And your options for answering are yes, or no, it's my first one, or no, but I've attended other ODO meetings before. So go ahead and make a selection, and then don't forget to press that little send button at the end. All right, I see some responses coming in. Thank you so much. Looks like we have a lot of first-time for webinar attendees. So welcome. We're really happy that you've chosen to spend a little bit of time this afternoon with us learning about energy. All right, still some coming in. We've got some repeat customers too. That's great. Okay, Stacy, let's move on to the next question. So our next question is, we'd like to know a little bit more about you. And we are wondering if you can tell us, where are you joining us from today? So options are Oregon Coast, Willamette Valley, not in Portland. I'm in Eugene today, so that's the one I'll select. Portland metro area, Central Oregon, Columbia River Gorge, Northeast Oregon, Southwest Oregon, Southeast Oregon, and outside of Oregon. Again, you might have to scroll down after you enter your selection and press send. All right, I see a few people responding. Looks like the Willamette Valley's showing up. And we even have some folks from outside of Oregon joining. Give folks another 20 seconds to get your response in. All right. Stacy, let's go ahead and close that one. Thanks everyone for testing out the polling function and telling us a little bit more about yourself. Okay, before we launch into the report, a few words about the Oregon Department of Energy. You'll see our mission on the slide here, as well as the 5 general areas of our work. The Biennial Energy Report is a key product that the agency uses to help Oregonians make informed decisions about energy. And it's also emblematic of several of the bullets you can see under the What We Do section of this slide. It's a central place for Oregon's energy data information and analysis, and can be used for energy education, technical assistance, and helping to find solutions for Oregon's energy challenges. And I also want to point out that this year is the Oregon Department of Energy's 50th anniversary. We've been leading the state to a safe, equitable, clean, and sustainable energy future since 1975. So you may be wondering, why do we write this report? Well, in 2017, the Oregon legislature passed HB 2343, which charged the department with developing a report every 2 years, hence the biennial, to inform local, state, regional, and federal energy policy development and energy planning and investments. And this report, which is based on analysis of data and information collected and compiled by the Oregon Department of Energy, provides a comprehensive review of energy resources, policies, trends, and forecasts, and what they mean for Oregon. Each topic is self-contained and can either be read in the context of the report or on its own. So as you'll see when we go through them, the different sections target different levels of information. Perhaps you're a data-driven person who's all about energy by the numbers. Or you may be someone who has expertise in the technologies that we've reviewed, but you want to deep dive into one of the Energy 101 topics. And if you're new to Oregon or to energy, I would recommend the history timeline as a great way to familiarize yourself with the key events that shaped Oregon's energy system. So the 2024 report, which came out in November, which we're focusing on today, is the fourth edition of the Biennial Energy Report. Each edition contains updated data on Oregon's energy consumption, production, costs, and progress on our energy goals. And as I mentioned, each report covers different topics, but they're all meant to build on previous editions as a collection of energy data and topics. So I'm happy to share that with this report, we've produced nearly 100 different briefings about Oregon's energy landscape. And you can find all of those briefings on this website under the Burr collection. So here's the overall report table of contents for 2024. You'll see we tackled several hot topics this year, including what's driving electricity rate increases, potential alternatives to new transmission lines, peak electricity and markets, and a lot more. So hopefully we're ready to dive in, and I'm pleased to turn it over to Stephanie Cruz to walk us through the Energy by the Numbers section of the report.
Thank you, Janine. Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Cruz, a facilities engineer here at Odo. For those who have seen our reports before, we follow this Energy by the Numbers section format each year to present data and information so that you can compare the charts and graphs between versions. The purpose of this section is to provide facts and figures on Oregon's overall and sector-based energy use, energy production and generation, and energy expenditures. Energy by the Numbers focuses on the metrics and available data to track how Oregon produces, purchases, and uses various types of energy. You can see in the table of contents on this slide the different topics that we cover. First off, we have a couple of questions for you on energy facts and figures. Don't worry, this is a low stakes quiz. We're just curious about what you may already know. You should see the Slido poll pop up to the right on your screen. First question is, which source of energy does Oregon import the most? The options are A, wind, B, hydropower, C, natural gas, and D, petroleum. We'll give you a moment here to respond. Looks like we're getting quite a few responses already. All right, Stacy, can you reveal the answer for us? If you answered D, petroleum, to the first question, you're right. Oregon imports almost all of the petroleum that it uses. We have one more question for you here. What percentage of the electricity that Oregonians use comes from solar power? Slido's popping up with the next question. And while it's doing that, your options are A, 0.5%, B, 2.8%, or C, 4.2%. Thank you all for participating. I see we've got most of the answers in. Stacy, would you reveal the answer to the question? The correct answer to the second question is B. About 2.8% of the electricity Oregonians use comes from solar energy. Just 10 years ago, only 0.4% of Oregon's electricity came from solar. 5 years ago, it was at 0.5%. It will be interesting to see where we are at in 5 or 10 years from now. And great job, everyone. I'm impressed at how many of you got that answer correct. This chart is referred to as a Sankey diagram, and it represents the flow of energy in Oregon. Moving from left to right, it includes energy produced in the state, energy imported into the state, and energy converted for electricity generation in state, on through to sector energy use and energy exports. It's based on the calendar year 2022, and the units are trillion British thermal units, which is a common energy metric. This chart is based on the analysis and combination of data sources, including information from the US Energy Information Administration, sometimes referred to as the EIA, and generation and sector consumption data comes from there. Oregon's electricity resource mix analysis and transportation fuel analysis also are contributing sources for this chart. Most of the energy that Oregon produces in state is renewable electricity, including hydro, wind, and biomass, while Oregon's energy imports are mainly fossil fuel based. The energy we produce and import helps meet various needs, from in-state electricity generation to transportation fuels to the natural gas and electricity that supply homes and businesses. Some energy ultimately goes
Uh-oh, sounds like Stephanie's frozen. We are having technical issues with one of our presenters. Sorry about that. Hold on for a second. We'll see if we can get Stephanie back up here.
Can
Stephanie,
you
I
hear me
see that
now,
you're
Jen?
back. We lost you for a little bit.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Could you help place me where we left off?
You were just starting to talk about Oregon's energy flow.
All right. So the Sankey diagram is based on the calendar year 2022, and it's in trillion British thermal units, a common energy metric. So this chart's based on analysis and combination of data sources, including the US Energy Information Administration, often referred to as the EIA, their generation and sector consumption data, and Oregon Department of Energy's electricity resource mix analysis and transportation fuel analysis. Most of the energy that Oregon produces in state is renewable electricity, including hydro, wind, and biomass, while Oregon's energy imports are mainly fossil fuel based. The energy we produce and import helps meet various needs, from in-state electricity generation, transportation fuels, to natural gas and electricity that supply homes and businesses. Some energy ultimately goes unused due to system inefficiencies, and some is exported to other states, mostly as electricity in Oregon. We really like this chart because it gives us a high-level overview of energy in Oregon. We have a YouTube video that walks through the description of what you see here in an effort to help make this information more accessible. Jenny will drop a link to the video in the chat for you. And one note about this year's data. The EIA methodology for estimating primary energy use for renewables was updated to be more consistent with international standards. So comparisons between this Sankey diagram and previous biennial energy report Sankeys are not direct apples to apples comparisons. And there is a thorough explanation of what has changed in the report in the About the Data section. Oregon saw an overall trend of increased energy use from 1960 through the early 1970s, and then a sharp decline in 1989. This drop is newly apparent after the EIA methodology change that I just mentioned. During this time, the state shifted from reliance on fuel and wood to natural gas and electricity, mainly efficient hydroelectric generation on the electricity side. Oregon reached its highest energy consumption in 1972, both in stationary and in transportation fuel uses. Since then, total energy use has been mostly flat. That's shown in darker blue, the line that starts lower at the beginning of the chart but ends up higher at the end. In the last 30 years, even though Oregon has had steady population growth, total energy consumption has remained flat. This is shown in the lighter blue line on the chart as a steady decrease in energy consumption per capita, starting higher at the beginning of the chart on the left, but ending up lower. Oregonians are doing a great job with energy efficiency to keep per capita consumption down, even as the population increases. But as you'll see in the next slide, that trend could change. Energy efficiency remains the second largest energy resource in the Pacific Northwest after hydropower. The Northwest Power and Conservation Council's 2021 Northwest Power Plan concluded that cost-effective energy efficiency can meet a large amount of new load growth in the region. But more recent analysis indicates that the rate of load growth is increasing. The 2024 update to the Pacific Northwest Utility Conference Committee's Northwest Regional Forecast projects that electricity consumption could increase from about 23,700 average megawatts in 2024 to about 31,000 average megawatts in 2033. This is an over 30% increase in electricity demand over the next 10 years, and the amount is pretty close to our cumulative regional savings from energy efficiency work over the last 40 years. And to help with understanding what that might mean, I want to define load and demand for you. Load is the actual electricity used, while demand is what's anticipated to be needed in the next minutes or hour. The Regional Conservation Progress Report to the Northwest Power and Conservation Council in October of 2023 affirmed the target set in the 2021 plan and noted that the region exceeded the savings achievement targets for 2021. This chart shows Oregon's estimated portion of the regional power plan efficiency goals. You can see a trend of declining savings, that's the vertical bars, over the last 3 years, as well as the reduced target for 2022, shown as the line going across the years. Oregon spent less money on energy for all sectors in 2019 and 2020, coinciding with the COVID-19 pandemic. Much of the drop resulted from a decrease in transportation fuel expenditures, shown in dark blue on the top section. However, in 2021 and 2022, total expenditures for energy increased in Oregon. The sharpest increase was in transportation fuel costs, both because people were driving more post-pandemic and transportation fuel prices increased. Total vehicle miles traveled in Oregon have increased by 13.5% between 2020 and 2022. At the same time, volatile crude oil prices, the primary driver of the price of gasoline and diesel, almost doubled from an average closing price of $42 per barrel in 2020 to an average of $82 a barrel in the first 3 quarters of 2024. You can see how the cost of transportation fuels swings rapidly in the timeframe shown. While residential and commercial expenditures increased slightly, industrial sector expenditures, shown in aqua, that's the second from the bottom section on the chart, rose more significantly. You can read more about electricity rate drivers in the Energy 101 section of our report, and I believe Jenny has a link to drop for that one as well. This chart depicts Oregon's greenhouse gas emissions by end-use sector since 1990. Most of Oregon's greenhouse gas emissions come from the production and consumption of energy, close to 89% of the emissions shown. Oregon has taken many steps to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which have trended downward since 2007. Energy policies such as the Renewable Portfolio Standard and the Low Carbon Fuel Standard, as well as the Great Recession, contributed to greenhouse gas emission reductions in the mid-2000s and early teens. Oregon's greenhouse gas emissions increased from 2015 to 2019, largely due to a rise in transportation emissions. Those are shown in dark blue, the thick line at the bottom of the chart. After a big dip in emissions during the first year of the pandemic in 2020, emissions rebounded in 2021, although to a level lower than pre-COVID. The horizontal lines that run through the chart show various greenhouse gas reduction targets for Oregon. Although the state did not meet the 2020 goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 10% below 1990 levels, that's the bright yellow line across the top, an Oregon Department of Energy and Oregon Climate Action Commission analysis found that if all existing state policies are fully implemented, Oregon is on track to meet its 2035 goal of 45% below 1990 emission levels. And the Commission will update that analysis later this year. The electricity that Oregonians use comes from a diverse set of generation resources, including hydropower, natural gas, nuclear, and renewables like wind and solar. The bubble chart on the left shows Oregon's electricity resource mix in 2022. Hydropower, the largest bubble in light blue, continues to provide the largest portion of Oregon's electricity, followed by coal and natural gas. I'll come back to that brown unspecified bubble in just a moment. Oregon's last coal plant stopped operating in 2020, but the state still receives electricity generated from coal plants in other states. That is shown in the gray bubble at the top center. Oregon's 2015 Coal to Clean bill set an end date for coal serving Oregon customers, meaning that post 2030, most, if not all, of the coal bubble will be gone from the state's mix. Renewable resources like wind, shown in orange, and solar, shown in yellow, have been steadily increasing and are expected to continue growing as Portland General Electric and Pacific Power are working to achieve the state's 100% clean electricity goal by 2040. Oregon's mix of electricity generation varies from year to year, largely because the state's hydropower output is affected by the amount and type of precipitation that the state receives each year. The bar chart on the right shows how the resource mix has changed each year from 2012 to 2022. Odo provides annual updates to this information on our electricity resource mix webpage, and we're looking to update it soon with the 2022 data. Now, back to that large dark brown bubble and its portion of the bar chart for 2022. This section represents utility purchases of electricity through open markets. These market purchases are often made shortly before the energy is used, and the actual resource used to produce that energy is not captured. Odo previously worked with partners in the region to calculate an estimate of what the market purchases resource mix might look like. So you won't see brown bars in previous years, but we have realized that the evolving use of energy markets has made this methodology no longer viable. Instead, Odo is now reporting the amount of electricity that comes from these market purchases for the electricity resource mix. We are investigating options to assess the resources in the mix for future electricity resource mix calculations. You can learn more about this change in the about the data section of our report as well. Direct use fuels are used for space and water heating, cooking food in homes and businesses, and they're also used for a variety of manufacturing and industrial processes in the state. We want to make sure that it's clear that direct use fuels exclude transportation fuels or fuels used to generate electricity in the sectors. So this is just the portion of fuels that are delivered to a site and used for a purpose there besides electricity generation. As you can see in this annual consumption chart, Oregon's direct fuel use has changed significantly over time. Heating oil, shown in orange in about the middle of the chart, and other petroleum fuels like kerosene were once prevalent in Oregon homes, businesses, and industry, but use of those has steadily declined since 1972. These were replaced by less expensive and cleaner burning natural gas, shown in maroon, which ends up at the highest amount of use in 2022. Natural gas became more widely used as Oregon's population increased. At the same time, Oregon's timber industry contracted due to curtailment of federal timber sales, which also produced some of the biomass fuel used as a byproduct. So you can see a drop in biomass, shown as a tan line in the chart around 1989. But biomass is a renewable source of energy and has recently experienced a steady increase in use. It ends up as the second highest amount of direct use fuels in 2022. In Oregon and nationally, total transportation energy consumption has been on the rise since 1960. There have been some brief dips in this trajectory, including during the energy crisis of the 1970s, the Great Recession in the late 2000s, and in the early 2020s during the COVID pandemic. Petroleum product consumption, including gasoline, shown in yellow as the highest line, and diesel, shown in purple as the second highest line, still dominates transportation fuel use in Oregon. Beginning in 2007, you can see increased use of ethanol, shown in dark green along the bottom, which increased in use with the implementation of state and federal renewable fuel standards. The renewable fuel standards also help push the use of biodiesel, which is just barely discernible as a magenta line in the bottom right hand of the chart. While electricity consumption for transportation cannot easily be discerned in this chart, it is growing rapidly as electric vehicle adoption increases. In July 2024, electric vehicle registrations in Oregon topped 100,000 and were nearly 3% of all light-duty vehicle registrations. As of September 2024, we have more than 104,000 EVs registered in the state. As electric vehicles become a bigger part of Oregon's on-road vehicles, it's anticipated that gasoline consumption will drop and electricity consumption will rise. The report also includes information on energy burden, which is assessed by comparing the amount a household spends on utility bills for their homes with their total income. Households spending more than 6% of their income on energy are typically regarded as having a high energy burden, while those spending 10% or more are considered severely energy burdened. 28.4% of all Oregon households had high or severe energy burdens in 2022, and the energy affordability gap, what it would take to have all households paying less than 6% of their income on energy, is estimated to be $277 million per year. The price of energy and goods has continued to increase over the last 2 years, and previous downward trends in the number of highly or severely energy burdened households in Oregon has reversed. More families are now experiencing high energy burden than at the peak of the pandemic. The number of highly or severely energy burdened households in Oregon increased by more than 100,000 between 2020 and 2022 to a total of 477,540 households. In Oregon, low-income households spend over 4 times more on energy costs when they're compared to the average spending of non-low-income households. And that comparison is done as a percentage of their income. Energy burden is a significant concern for many Oregonians, and the number of energy burdened households is higher in many rural parts of the state. As you can see on this map, the highest energy burdened households, shown in the darkest shade of red, are some of the most rural counties in Oregon, whereas the least energy burdened households, shown in the lightest yellow, are generally found in the metropolitan centers of the state. Apart from electricity and heating costs, Oregonians can also be burdened by transportation fuel costs. Transportation burden represents the total annual transportation costs of households in comparison to their income. You can read more about transportation burden in the report. Together, these calculations of energy burden are indicators of energy affordability for Oregonians. On ODO's online version of the Biennial Energy Report, you can also find updated county profiles that show various population and energy characteristics for Oregon's 36 counties. This includes energy burden, typical home heating, transportation habits, and more. Jenny will drop a link to the county profiles in the chat for you. Oh, looks like she's already done that. Thank you, Jenny. Oregonians spent $19.5 billion on energy in 2022. That's a $7.4 billion increase since 2020. The majority of Oregon's energy spending by source comes from petroleum products, as shown in light blue on the bar chart on the left. $12.7 billion in 2022, which is almost twice the amount spent in 2020. And since most of our transportation fuels are imported, this means that we're sending this money out of state. Petroleum is largely used for transportation in Oregon, which is responsible for 36.7% of statewide energy consumption. While transportation only accounts for about a third of our energy consumption, we spend nearly twice as much on it as all other energy sources combined. Petroleum products are affected by global pricing and events, and since 2020, gasoline prices have nearly doubled. Conversely, the cost of electricity is less affected by global shifts. Electricity retail rates are also subject to regulatory oversight, whether through the Oregon Public Utility Commission for the investor-owned utilities or the local governing boards of consumer-owned utilities, which means that prices are not nearly as volatile as petroleum fuels. Electricity prices also rose in the last several years, but much less so compared to petroleum fuels. Since 2022, many electric utility customers have seen further rate increases or are facing proposed rate increases, and we'll be covering this in a later slide. Natural gas expenditures constitute a smaller portion of total consumer energy expenditures in Oregon, primarily because not all people and businesses have access to natural gas. Natural gas retail prices are also regulated by the Oregon Public Utility Commission, and like electricity prices, have increased since 2020. I hope you've enjoyed these charts. There's a lot more where that came from. You can check out our full report on our website to see even more data and analysis on energy in Oregon. Jessica, do you have any questions on the energy by the numbers section from the chat?
Thanks, Stephanie. I don't see any questions, but I want to encourage folks, if you do have questions, throw them in the chat, especially as they occur to you. We'll be happy to answer them in some of these pauses as we move through the different topics in the report. All right, so I will keep an eye on the chat, but Ruchi's also in there helping to keep an eye on things. I'm Jessica Rikers. I manage the technology and policy section here at the department, and I'm a big fan of the Biennial Energy Report. It's one of my favorite things that we get to work on at the agency. And in the 2020 edition of this report, we debuted an Oregon Energy History Timeline section, which aimed to show how Oregon's energy systems have evolved over time, from harnessing our state's various natural resources to human events like technology development and energy crises. The timeline also shared events that significantly affected tribes in Oregon, the original inhabitants of the state, and among the many events along the timeline are actions and policy choices that Oregon's leaders and citizens have made in response to changing times, like stronger clean energy policies or a focus on electric vehicle adoption. So in the 2022 report, Odo evolved that timeline to create an interactive online tool and experience, which is really cool. Our team collected dozens of photographs, stories, videos, and more to create an insightful and informative journey through Oregon's energy history and present. So for that 2024 Biennial Energy Report, Odo has added additional milestones from the last 2 years. So check out a new feature of this year, including a band of history milestones commemorating our agency's 50th anniversary serving Oregon this year. And I see that Jenny has added that link into the chat. All right, so I think that I will be conducting another poll for everybody. So get ready to see if you know some things about Oregon's energy history. The first question should be easy because I just gave you a huge hint. What year was the Oregon Department of Energy established? Your answers are A, 1975, B, 1986, C, 1992, and D, 2020. Give you just a minute to answer that in the chat, or I'm sorry, in the polling question. And the big hint was it's our 50th anniversary this year for the Department of Energy. All right, Stacy, you want to reveal the answer? Oh, fantastic. Everybody got it. 1975, a great year. It was the year that Odo was established, but also it was 2 years before the Star Wars franchise started. So, you know, all things were looking good in those late 70s timeframes. So let's see. Next question is, what was the name of the tribal fishing ground that was flooded by the construction of the Dalles Dam? Was it A, Kettle Falls, B, Celilo Falls, or C, Klamath Falls? Can indicate that in the webinar survey questions there. Give people just a few more minutes, or a few more seconds. All right, and let's see, can we reveal the answer, Stacy? Excellent, Celilo Falls. So that fishing ground was flooded by the Dalles Dam, and you can learn about that in our timeline and some of the other conflicts that have arisen in the state between tribal and cultural resources and energy development. And finally, what year was Oregon's last remaining coal plant demolished? Was it, I'm not seeing the Slido come up. There we go. All right, was it A, 2018, B, 2020, C, 2022, or D, 2024? I'll give you just a few seconds here to answer that question. Okay, Stacy, what is the answer? Yeah, this one might have been a tricky one, but a lot of you were not tripped up. The Boardman coal plant was demolished in 2022. And if you picked 2020, that was the year the plant closed. PGE demolished the tower in 2022, and you can watch a video of that demolition on our history timeline. So now that we've gotten through a few more survey questions, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Roger, who's going to dive into some of our deeper dive topics in the report. Roger?
Thanks, Jessica. Hey, everybody, I'm Roger Kainu. I'm an analyst here at Odo. The next section is called Energy 101, and it aims to help readers understand how energy is produced, used, and transformed. The information is meant to provide a foundation for those new to energy and those who are already steeped in this sector. You can see the topics on the right-hand side of this slide, including energy resilience, electricity rate, increased drivers, home energy scoring, and more. Next slide there, Andy. But first, it's time for just another quiz. This one is going to get more tricky than the last one where they gave you the answers. So the first question is, as we're pulling up Slido, which of the following sources produces the highest amount of greenhouse gas emissions in Oregon? Natural gas, petroleum, electricity, or landfills? All right. I'm seeing answers come in. Looks pretty heavy. All right, I think all the answers are in. Hey, we've got a winner. Look at that. 70% of you got it right with petroleum. You're off to the races. All right, we're going to try another question here. Basically, if you chose B on that, petroleum produces about 37% of greenhouse gas emissions in Oregon. So that's an easy winner. We'd also like to ask you a question. In which of the following ways does the energy sector use water? Mining and extraction, refining, producing hydropower, or all of the above? Doesn't look like anyone's going to get it wrong. Oh, we're close. Those of you that chose D, all of the above, you're spot on. There are many ways water needs energy and energy needs water. So that's a record setter right there. 92% of the crowd got it right. Now we'll dive into some of the Energy 101 topics we covered in our latest report. I'm going to pass this to my colleague, Jessica, to cover our first 101. Jessica?
Hi, Roger. Thank you for those great questions that you shared with the whole group. I'm going to dive into hydrogen. There's a lot of interest in hydrogen, particularly clean hydrogen, which is hydrogen produced with little or no carbon emissions. This form of hydrogen is something that is of great interest to people around the globe because it has the potential to be a clean energy fuel option especially for items that are really hard to electrify. So think about things like big trucks and planes, things like that. And clean hydrogen could support a lot of different end uses, which I just talked about, including, I didn't mention, high heat industrial processes, but it could also function as energy storage to help enable more clean electricity generation and maintain grid reliability. And although there's no clean hydrogen available in Oregon today, a clean hydrogen economy is poised to scale in the Pacific Northwest. And this is because there have been a lot of recent federal investments that provide economic support for clean hydrogen development. And Oregon has several policies that encourage the production and use of clean fuels, including hydrogen and hydrogen technologies. Oregon and Washington State won a U.S. Department of Energy funding opportunity to develop a clean hydrogen economy in our region. And this is funding 17 different projects in Oregon, Washington, and Montana that will support not only the production, but also the use of clean hydrogen in the region. Once complete, the hub is expected to produce 400 metric tons of clean hydrogen per day and create more than 10,000 jobs for the region. This and other hydrogen hubs across the country serve to address challenges to scaling the clean hydrogen industry, including costs and infrastructure needs. And before I hand it back to Roger to cover our next topic, I just wanted to flag, I saw a great question from Marianne Seifert in the chat, which is, why is it called clean? Is there dirty hydrogen? There is dirty hydrogen. In fact, most of the hydrogen that we use today is created from natural gas. And so you have emissions associated with the production of that hydrogen, although when you combust the hydrogen, there are no emissions associated with it. And I'm going to pass it over to Roger, who's going to cover our next topic.
All right, next, let's move on to another hot topic, and that's agrivoltaics. Agrivoltaics use the same technologies to generate electricity as conventional solar voltaic systems, but with a variety of adaptations to structural components to meet the demands of sharing land with grazing or crops. Researchers in the US and Europe have found that agrivoltaics has the potential to meet a significant portion of electricity demand. Potential benefits to farmers and ranchers include irrigation water savings, beneficial shade for crops and livestock, creation of microclimates that protect crops from frost and weather damage, energy generation to power farm operations, and or income from selling power. So those are some amazing benefits that we can look at with agrivoltaics. Potential challenges include high upfront costs, long interconnection wait times, community acceptance, increased complexity for farm operations, and limits to crop choices. Pacific Northwest crops that have been successful in agrivoltaics are vegetable and vegetable seeds, herbs and leafy greens, pasture grasses, potatoes. Other states are experimenting with tomatoes and peppers, blueberries, cranberries, and tea, while Midwestern research universities are experimenting with row crops, including corn. Oregon State University is a leader in agrivoltaic research. North Willamette Research and Extension Center has built an experimental facility to experiment with combining several Oregon crops under solar panels. Agrivoltaic projects are permissible uses on agricultural land under Oregon's land use laws, but are required to obtain a conditional use permit or a Goal 3 exception when constructed for the purpose of generating power for sale. Small-scale agrivoltaic projects intended to generate power for use on site would likely not need to obtain a conditional use permit or Goal 2 exception. Next slide. Let's move on and discuss greenhouse gas emissions. Most of Oregon's greenhouse gas emissions come from energy used every day, including electricity, direct use fuels, and transportation fuels. 5 main economic sectors: transportation, commercial, residential, industrial, and agricultural, contribute about 61 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent in Oregon in 2021. Just for context, Oregon's greenhouse gas emissions should be 3 million megatons of CO2 equivalent or lower by the year 2050 to meet the Oregon Climate Action Commission's recommended goals. So that's quite a disparity between 61 and 3. As we note on this slide, the energy sector plays a unique and important role in climate change. It can be a cause of climate change, can be affected by climate change, and can also be part of the solution. Climate change can affect energy demand as hotter and longer heat waves require additional cooling in homes and businesses. Warmer temperatures and more frequent heat waves have created new summer peaks in electricity demand, where the Pacific Northwest used to typically peak in winter. With those higher temperatures caused by climate change, many areas of Oregon that historically receive snow during the winter are more likely to receive rain. This change in precipitation type will shift decades-long patterns of when hydropower, which accounts for nearly 40% of the electricity used in Oregon, is available across the Pacific Northwest. Climate change may also affect the reliability of Oregon's energy system. Increased frequency and intensity of extreme weather can affect energy facilities and transmission lines, threatening the reliability of the energy services Oregonians need. Extreme flooding and landslides can also affect delivery of other energy, like liquid fuels. As climate change affects Oregon's energy system physically, it also creates additional financial costs. This can include costs from generating electricity, responding to emergency events, repairing infrastructure, and investments in additional heating and cooling equipment in homes and businesses. While climate change affects the energy sector, certain actions, policy choices, and consumer behaviors can help mitigate climate change or help Oregonians adapt to changing climate. Energy efficiency and conservation can reduce increased demand for energy, and the transition to locally generated low-carbon fuels will reduce greenhouse gas emissions that contribute to climate change. Distributed energy generation, renewable energy, microgrids, and energy storage can improve the reliability of energy on the grid. It's also important to acknowledge that climate change has a disproportionate effect on communities that have been traditionally and are currently underrepresented in public processes, and typically have less access to resources for adapting to climate change. In transition to a clean energy future, there is a renewed effort to strengthen equity and ensure these communities are not left behind. Next up, Jessica.
Thanks, Roger. So Roger teed me up really well here. We included a 101 piece on electricity rate increases because many Oregonians and many Americans across the country are currently facing higher electricity prices today than a few years ago. In fact, many of you may be experiencing this. And while the prices vary by utility, there are common cost drivers that are affecting Oregon's electric utilities. One of these is rising power costs. And an example of this would be when the Bonneville Power Administration raises its rates for the electricity that it sells to Oregon consumer and utilities. Another cost driver is ongoing infrastructure needs. The graphic on the right here shows how costs for ordinary utility equipment have increased due to the inflation and supply chain cost pressures since 2019. And I like to point out in particular the cost of conduit, which is the wires that actually are running along transmission and distribution poles. Those have increased by nearly twofold since 2019. So you get some significant higher costs there. A third common cost driver is dealing with wildfires and extreme weather, something that Roger was telling us is going to be happening more often and having effects on that equipment. And the cost to mitigate and respond to those events and replace the equipment, all of that is driving up electricity rates as well. And some people have asked whether House Bill 2021, which is our state's clean electricity goals, in which we're trying to achieve a 100% clean electricity grid by 2040, whether that might be a cost driver. And while the state's clean electricity targets are not a direct driver of the recent rate increases, this will likely have future cost impacts for customers, especially in Portland General Electric, Pacific Power, and some of our electricity service suppliers who provide electricity to several of Oregon's businesses. And while rising prices is a matter of statewide interest, there's a lot of work going on to mitigate price increases. For example, the Oregon Public Utility Commission is implementing the Energy Affordability Act of 2021, which has already delivered tens of millions in relief to income qualified ratepayers. But there are also numerous energy efficiency and weatherization programs that support access to safe, affordable, and adequate energy service. And the next topic that I'm going to talk about is actually related to costs for electricity. We're going to talk a little bit about peak electricity demand, sometimes referred to as peak load. This is referring to the highest demand for electricity for a specific area, service area, geographic area for a specific amount of time. For example, your electric utility will have annual load peak, which is the largest amount of electricity demand for that utility in a specific year. Excuse me. But there are peak electricity demands that occur each day over the course of a month or along any other time frames. As an example, daily peaks often occur midday when society is most active, or also in the evening when homes are most active. Annual peaks occur both in the summer and in the winter when heating or cooling is in high demand because of the weather extremes, with the summer peaks often occurring later in the day and winter peaks occurring in the late evening or early morning hours at the coldest time of day when people are starting to be active. The electric grid is sized to meet the biggest peak loads anticipated over a planning horizon. So peak demand is a big driver of electricity generation and transmission investments and consequently utility rates. Many electric utilities are forecasting a sharp increase in peak demand over the next 10 years. You can see in the chart on the left here, Portland General Electric's previous and forecasted peak loads for both summer, which are shown in red, and the highest, and winter, which is shown in blue, indicate the highest amount of load for each year. And it goes backwards in time to what they've actually experienced. And then you'll notice that it goes up quite high with a sharp inflection point expected beyond 2025. And those are obviously modeled future expectations for load. Annual peak loads are growing as a result of an increasing number of heat waves in the Pacific Northwest. More Oregonians are buying and using air conditioners to cool their homes and business. And so when it's really, really hot outside and everybody's running those devices, this creates those big peaks in demand, especially during the late afternoon hours in the hot summer months. And we also see a general trend in overall load demand, which is resulting from the growth of new chip manufacturing and data centers in Oregon. And while that increases our overall load, when you increase the overall load, that pushes the peak load even higher. So you can see that reflected in the chart that's on the right, which shows Portland General Electric's industrial sector load growth as the black line there that is going up quite rapidly since about 2013, 2014. So we talked a little bit about electricity rates, and we talked a little bit about the peak load and how that drives rates. And I'm going to talk a little bit about something called the electricity day ahead market, different types of electricity day ahead markets. These are, apologies, let me start over. Electric utilities can supply electricity by generating their own electricity. But they can also purchase it. And one of the ways that they can purchase it is through an organized wholesale electricity market. One of these types of markets is a day ahead market. This allows utilities to purchase and sell electricity for the following day. So they're basically looking at what they think they'll need, and they look on the market for entities that can help fill that need for them. So these day ahead markets function as an auction market where entities enter bids to buy or to sell electricity for a given period of time in the following day. Our Oregon utilities don't currently participate in a day ahead market, but most of the electricity providers in the state have indicated different degrees of interest in joining one of these markets. And this 101 piece looks at some of the benefits of day ahead markets, including the fact that an organized day ahead market can reduce the price of electricity by creating a centralized place to efficiently connect buyers with sellers. So this is one of the ways that we can help offset some of the price increases we're seeing from other factors happening. Centralized markets can also help utilities reduce emissions by increasing the likelihood of using wind and solar resources when they're available. It can also potentially improve grid reliability by enabling a larger pool of available resources to meet electricity demand needs. But of course, there are also some challenges to joining these markets. One of these is that these markets have to integrate different states' climate and carbon emissions policies and tracking mechanisms, which can be very different and diverse. And if careful work is not done on those, then it could lead to things like miscounts on how much of a specific type of energy is used, which could cause problems in those programs. There are also potential structural challenges for existing markets as renewable energy becomes a larger component of electricity generation. Those market structures may need to evolve. And also managing transmission constraints, which can be challenging when you're trying to make energy available to people across a wide geographic area. And I'm going to cover a little bit about transmission in just a moment. But before I do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about energy resilience. Great. Resilience refers to the ability to withstand and rapidly restore energy delivery following non-routine disruptions of severe impact or duration. Energy systems, as you know, are the backbone of essential services like emergency response and medical care, heating and cooling, and transportation. So many governments, communities, and energy providers are very interested in options to improve their energy resilience. The need to bolster energy resilience has become more evident in recent years with an increase in the frequency and severity of threats and disruptions to energy systems. Some of you may have experienced electricity outages from extreme weather events like ice storms, or even public safety power shutoffs that can occur during potential wildfire events. Other possible disruptions could result from cybersecurity events and the nearly unparalleled threat that the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake poses for Oregon. Some examples of energy resilience actions that can be used for larger, wider energy systems are upgrading older infrastructure with more durable and resilient equipment, or utilities or service providers can underground power lines that increase their ability to withstand a variety of extreme weather events. And they can implement system segmentation, which isolates impacted areas and allows unaffected areas to continue to provide energy services even while they address the affected area. Actions to increase resilience at the community level can look like increasing and diversifying fuel storage, providing access to community resilience centers that have backup power, and developing solar and battery storage projects or microgrids to support critical public services and household resilience. It's important to note that increasing energy resilience, either across a larger energy-wide system or for communities, also helps ensure more equitable protection from energy disruptions, because some groups are more vulnerable to these disruptions and have fewer resources to bolster their individual resilience. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Roger to cover another Energy 101 topic.
Thanks, Jessica. Before you talk about transmission, let's squeeze in a quick topic on the relationship of water and energy. It's really important to understand energy is intertwined in everything that Oregonians do, from heating and turning lights on to powering vehicles to move us and the goods we consume. This energy in any form would not be possible without water. The same is true for water we drink, use to bathe and clean, and grow our food. Energy is needed to provide clean water when and where we need it. Though interdependent, these have been managed independently. Understanding some of these interdependencies is critical to making informed management, investments, and policy choices going forward. Water is used at multiple stages of energy production, for drilling, cooling, and fire suppression in mining to cooling in petroleum refining. It is used to condense steam in coal, natural gas, nuclear, and biomass thermal electric generation, and in limited amounts for periodic cleaning of wind turbine blades and solar panels. Water drives the hydroelectric turbines that supply 40% of the electricity used in Oregon. The hydroelectric system output is highly dependent on the availability of water in the system, which changes from year to year, but is also affected by increasing droughts as a result of climate change. Hydro plays a critical role in bringing more renewable energy resources onto the grid so that we can mitigate greenhouse gas emissions resulting from electricity generation. The relative availability of water to the rivers that flow through the hydropower system will have implications on how effectively and efficiently we can reduce our emissions. Water plays a central role in producing energy, and energy is also needed to provide water, including to treat wastewater, pump water from wells, irrigate fields, and heat water at home, work, and for other industrial uses. Water is also needed to mine petroleum and minerals during the construction of energy infrastructure and to cool computer servers at data centers. Sourcing enough water can be challenging in arid regions, including areas more prone to drought or with groundwater restrictions. The Oregon Water Resources Department plans to publish an updated Integrated Water Resources Strategy in 2025, which discusses some of these interdependencies and includes a more complete discussion of water infrastructure and planning needs, many of which also include required energy resources. Odo is currently developing an Oregon energy strategy, which will assess different pathways the state can take toward a more resilient and sustainable clean energy transition, including how these options affect land and water use. Back to you, Jessica.
Thanks, Roger. So as promised, we have a topic in here about transmission. Some of you may know that expanding and increasing the capacity of the transmission system is critical to meeting rapidly growing demand for electricity, achieving our clean energy future, and keeping the lights on. So it's important to note that it can be difficult, time-consuming, and expensive to site new transmission corridors, build new lines, and there are many options to help reduce the total amount of transmission expansion needed, and these things can also help improve the reliability and resilience of the grid. So first, there are more options for grid operators to access and use more of the existing transmission system. This can happen through things like energy markets, like the electricity day-ahead market that I described earlier. Broader, geographically diverse electricity markets help grid operators leverage a broader diversity of loads and resources. This means that operators have more options to meet those load needs using the existing system. Second, transmission operators can repurpose and expand the transmission capacity of an existing corridor. For example, there have been new renewable energy projects that are built near to retiring coal or natural gas plants, and they take advantage of that freed up line capacity to provide energy to the grid. Existing lines can also be reconductored so that they can carry more power, usually by adding a second circuit or wire to an existing corridor. Third, grid operators can leverage the use of local energy resources to reduce the need to deliver as much electricity from faraway generators to the load centers. Local energy resources can include things like energy efficiency, which reduces our overall demand, or demand response, which can help things like water heaters and thermostats and even EV chargers slow down or even stop temporarily when there's a high peak load need. And finally, operators can use grid enhancing technologies, which are often called GETs for short. These are a suite of sensor and modeling technologies that can make temporary real-time adjustments to transmission operations, which can, in certain conditions, enable existing lines to carry more electricity. All of these options to build new transmission corridors come with other benefits beyond additional capacity, including deferring or reducing ratepayer costs to upgrade the system, avoiding environmental and cultural effects from creating a new transmission corridor, and reducing potential wildfire risk that comes with additional transmission line use. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Roger, who's going to carry us home on these Energy 101 topics.
All right, thanks again, Jessica. Now I'd like to have a brief discussion about home energy scoring. It's a personal favorite of mine, and it's also a way of informing consumers about energy performance of a home, like all of you that are listening. Much like miles per gallon for a car reveals fuel performance of a vehicle, a home energy score reveals energy performance of a home. The score assessment provides a clear, standardized assessment of a home's energy efficiency on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the most efficient. This makes it easy for homeowners to see where their home stands in terms of energy use. Alongside the score, homeowners receive recommendations on how to make their homes more efficient. By making improvements, they can potentially lower energy bills and reduce overall energy consumption, which can result in significant savings over time. Homeowners can also use the score to compare properties and choose homes that are more energy efficient, which can mean lower utility costs. This is especially helpful when comparing similarly priced homes, as a higher score may signal a better long-term investment. The home energy score also comes with specific suggestions for upgrades or changes that can improve a home's energy efficiency. This could include insulation, window upgrades, or HVAC improvements, which are actionable and help guide improvement efforts. For environmentally conscious consumers, the score highlights how a home's energy use impacts the environment. Improving the score often leads to lower carbon emissions and a reduced environmental footprint. In some cases, energy-efficient homes can have a higher market value. By improving the home energy score, homeowners may increase their property's appeal and value if they plan to sell in the future. Informing consumers about energy costs and upgrade decisions can assist in buying decisions, whether they are upgrading their existing home or purchasing a new home. Next slide, please. You might remember seeing this chart at the beginning of the presentation, showing Oregon's energy flow. Here we show the diagram again, this time with that waste category featured in a red shade. The remaining categories are grayed out. While the word waste implies some level of neglect or inattention in allowing energy to escape, energy loss is a normal outcome of storing, moving, converting, or using energy. Waste energy can be described as the unused portion of energy, or energy required to get to a final work product in a system or a process. In Oregon's energy system flow diagram, waste energy makes up about 54% of all energy produced or imported in the state. Some of this is unavoidable energy loss. Examples of energy efficiency work in buildings and processes are updating equipment to newer technology that uses less energy to do the same amount of work, or adjusting control of equipment to only use energy when it is needed. Waste energy most commonly occurs as excess heat energy, and heat energy is the least organized form of energy. In other words, it's easier to lose waste heat as it dissipates quickly into the environment. Capture and reuse of waste heat can improve overall energy system efficiency, and co-locating industrial processes that require heat with the generation with processes that produce heat is a great example of this. Efficiency investments can help support more reliable and resilient energy systems, among many other related benefits, and provide these with little to no negative effect on Oregon's land, air, and water. Now that you've had a brief overview of what we include in our 101 section this year, I'll hand it back to my colleague, Jessica, to talk about energy resources and technology reviews.
Thanks, Roger. Excellent coverage of the Energy 101s in the report. I'm going to cover our energy resource and technology reviews. And this section is all about introducing various energy resources and emerging technologies in the energy space. It's meant to build on previous reports for example, in 2022, we featured 6 topics. And in 2020, we featured nearly 24. And in fact, I wanted to flag there were some questions around nuclear, especially small modular nuclear reactors. And we covered small modular nuclear reactors in our energy technology and resource reviews in that 2020 report, which Jenny has just pasted into the chat. You can go take a look at it if you're interested. For our latest report, since we already have a robust collection of resource and tech reviews, we focused on 2 cutting-edge energy production technologies. But first, and you were probably expecting it, we have a couple of questions about these technologies before we dive in. So we're going to bring back the Slido. And our first question for everybody is, in which Oregon county is there an enhanced geothermal electricity demonstration project coming up? So which county is an enhanced geothermal electricity demonstration project? Is it Lincoln County, A, B, Klamath County, C, Deschutes County, or D, Wallowa County? And I think I pronounced Wallowa wrong. It's Wallowa. I know that. I don't even know what I was thinking. Apologies to anybody from Wallowa County. All right. Stacy, what is the answer? Oh, there it is. If you answered C, you're right. The Newberry volcano south of Bend is a demonstration site for enhanced geothermal. Klamath County is also well known for geothermal energy, but so far the traditional variety rather than the enhanced. So it looks like about half of you got that right. But you were in a good company if you guessed some other things, since there's a lot of geothermal that could be available across the state. All right, our next question in the chat is, what is a main difference between fusion power and traditional nuclear energy? Getting back to that nuclear discussion. Is it A, fusion power fuses atoms together while nuclear splits atoms? Is it B, there are more fusion power plants than nuclear power plants? C, fusion power produces zero waste while nuclear produces some? Or D, none of the above? This one might be a little trickier. I'll give you a couple more seconds. All right, Stacy, that's the big reveal. Excellent. Wasn't as tricky as I thought. That was a tough one, but if you answered A, and many of you did, you got it. This is an emerging technology, and while it would create less waste than nuclear energy, it wouldn't be zero waste. There would still be a little bit. All right, well, thank you all for your participation on that. So the first thing I'm going to dive into is enhanced geothermal systems. What are these? They're sometimes referred to as EGS, and they expand the potential for geothermal power production. Geothermal electricity generation is a renewable resource, and it has the benefit of not requiring as much land use as solar and wind farms typically do. Oregon has a lot of potential for geothermal right under our feet, but finding and identifying geothermal resources with just the right characteristics to produce energy isn't easy. The main challenge for traditional geothermal power plants is that they require hot water on site to generate power. A potential plant will require a water well that not only has the right temperature characteristics, but also the right amount of water. The methodology for identifying the water resource isn't perfect and can lead to building a plant that is ultimately not viable or doesn't produce the amount of energy expected. Enhanced geothermal systems can generate power from hot, dry rock instead, so water is not required underground at least. EGS plants, power plants introduce water, they bring the water in, and inject it into these dry wells, and the water is heated then by traveling through the fissures in this hot rock. The heated water is recovered in an adjacent well and used for power production. This method reduces or eliminates the need to ensure a well has the right water characteristics to create a viable plant. Now, EGS power plants are still relatively expensive compared to wind and solar, but new research may make them a cost-effective source of reliable renewable energy. In fact, as noted in our quiz, we have an EGS demonstration project underway at the Newberry Volcano south of Bend, Oregon. So we're looking forward to seeing what we learn from that project. And next up, we're going to talk about fusion energy. Fusion is what powers the sun, and if harnessed, could one day provide nearly limitless clean energy. I know that sounds kind of sci-fi and maybe a little far-fetched, but it could be on the horizon. Nuclear fusion releases energy through the fusing of two atoms, which produces extremely large amounts of energy. This differs from existing nuclear powers we talked about in our quiz. They use fission, the splitting of heavy or very large atoms, to produce energy. Another difference is that unlike existing nuclear fission power plants, fusion plants have significantly different waste profiles with very little nuclear waste byproducts. You may be familiar with national efforts to identify a repository for permanent storage for spent nuclear waste. As yet, no such place exists. There have been recent successful fusion tests that show the potential for this type of energy generation is possible, although research is still in its earliest stages. And there are barriers to overcome. Fusion power means developing a commercially viable reactor, addressing fuel needs to create fusion, and developing a regulatory structure for a fusion facility. Developers and regulators will need to address public concerns about safety, environmental impact, and effects on environmental justice communities for fusion energy to become a trusted technology. And now the last section of the 2024 Biennial Energy Report is all about some state energy project updates. Previous versions of our report included a policy brief section, but because during the time that we were producing this report, we were also working to develop an energy security plan and an Oregon energy strategy. We decided to just include an update on these major projects instead. Both the energy security plan and the energy strategy will be used to inform energy policy development and energy planning and investments, and will be used to identify opportunities to further Oregon's energy policies. And I don't think it's a bridge too far to say that you should expect to see the policy brief section back in our 2026 version of this report. So the Oregon Energy Security Plan was submitted on September 30th of last year to both the U.S. Department of Energy and the Oregon Legislature. The plan includes information regarding energy systems in Oregon, including electricity, natural gas, and liquid fuels, and focuses on a risk assessment for natural hazards, primarily focuses on a risk assessment for natural hazards. This includes things like wildfires, drought, flooding, and other hazards that can affect our energy systems. The plan was completed in coordination with the Oregon Public Utility Commission, and we got a lot of useful information from energy companies and utilities, as well as tribal, federal, state, and local governments and other interested parties and organizations. It was a real joint effort to put this report together. The plan must still be reviewed and, as necessary, updated every year in accordance with federal and state requirements. So our team is already looking ahead to what we might want to update or review ahead of the next planned version due this fall. And some of you may be familiar with our previous biennial energy report, which was published in 2022. In that report, Odo recommended that the state would benefit from an energy strategy to align policy development, regulation, financial investment, and technical assistance that would support an intentional transition to a clean energy economy. This means outlining a strategy that could identify specific pathways to meet the state's policy goals while still maintaining affordability and reliability, strengthening the economy, and prioritizing equity while also balancing trade-offs to maximize benefits and minimize harms. Ultimately, this strategy could be used to make informed decisions about Oregon's energy future and motivate action. The Oregon legislature agreed with our recommendation and in 2023 passed a bill directing Odo to develop a state energy strategy. The report is being developed in consultation with federally recognized tribes, relevant state agencies, and a lot of different kinds of interested parties. It will further build on state laws, policies, and targets regarding energy and greenhouse gas emissions, existing energy and integrated resource plans, and energy-related studies and data analysis. As you can see from this slide, work is well underway. The energy strategy team is coordinating with consultative interagency and partner groups, and recently shared results of our pathways modeling. The results of that model will inform conversations over the next several months to assess policy options that will help the state to achieve its energy and climate goals. In fact, we're hosting 2 online public forum events next week on Thursday, February 27th. One will begin at 1:00 p.m. and one at 5:00 p.m. Both the same event, a listening session. So if you are interested, please tune into one. You don't need to tune into both. Unless you really want to, go ahead. Odo's team will present the same information in each session. So we're going to provide a recap of key modeling insights, host a discussion on current energy policy and how they relate to the modeling results, and then open up the forum to hear from all Oregonians that are participating about their priorities and concerns as Odo turns to developing policy recommendations. My colleague Jenny is going to drop, if she hasn't already, a link in the chat where you can learn more, and I hope you'll consider joining us. You can also follow all of Odo's work on the energy strategy at the link on this page, sign up for email updates, and submit comments and questions. And I am pleased, I believe, to turn it back to Janine.
I don't think she's joined back yet, so it might be back to you, Jessica.
It's back to me then. That's how this works. So thank you again for joining us today and for the opportunity to present the information from our most recent biennial energy report. Thank you to all of my colleagues for walking through the highlights. As you can tell, we're very proud and passionate about this product and hope it's useful for you as you dive more into the energy world. Follow the link provided here or view or download the report online. You can also follow the work of the agency on Odo's website, including the Energy Security Plan and Oregon Energy Strategy that were discussed earlier. If any of you know of organizations that might be interested in a presentation like this or on a specific topic within the report, you can request one using the link at the bottom. We can tailor the information presented to individual interests. In fact, we've been doing that quite a bit lately. And finally, at Odo, we are already open to hearing interest on topics for the 2026 report. Please feel free to reach out with any suggestions. We will likely be specifically collecting feedback on the report in late 2025, later this year, and we'll include notices about this on our report webpage. So I want to thank you all again for tuning in, and we are happy to answer questions. You can either put your questions into the chat or indicate that you have a question, and we will unmute you or enable you to unmute, and you can ask your question in person to us right now.
Thanks, Jessica. I'm not seeing any raised hands yet, but let's give folks a minute to see if they can put one.
We're always happy to answer questions. It's one of our favorite things to do, actually. Actually, we really like it when people give us questions that stump us and we have to go and work on it a little bit. So feel free to ask the hard questions too. Oh,